Hello and welcome to Thursday Night Talk. This is a show where we discuss the week in Humboldt, the local issues, and the local personalities. I'm Talvi Freed, and I will be your local host for the next hour. Our topic this week, the ever-present economy crisis in Southern Humboldt. We did choose this topic after one of the panelists we have today, Izzy Vanderheiden, wrote an article in the January 2nd Lost Coast Outpost about the economic misery in Garberville and beyond. Is the bottoming out of cannabis prices solely responsible? How much of the retail misery can be laid to Amazon and other online retailers? What role does the homeless and aggressive panhandlers play? Is the situation hopeless? And if not, what are some of the paths forward? Of course, joining us tonight, we've got the aforementioned author of the article from Lost Coast Outpost staff reporter, Izzy Vanderheiden, and we'll be going by Izzy tonight. Hi, Izzy.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm glad you're here. About time. We've got KMUD's news director, Lauren Schmitt. Hello, Lauren.
Hey, thanks for having me.
First, cannabis cultivator and reporter Lisa Music, who should be joining us in a bit if she is not already here. And of course, we've got Laura Lasseter from the Southern Humboldt Business and Visitors Bureau, because may as well have an actual business representative here, even though everybody does seem to have some semblance of business knowledge for Southern Humboldt, interestingly enough, whether it be reporting or running the radio station that's based down there. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
I am so glad that you're here. So I feel like let's start with you, Izzy, because you wrote the article and I wanted to understand what the inspiration was for deciding to delve deeper into this.
Okay, yeah. So I used to be the news director or the co-news director at KMUD. Actually, I used to do what Lauren does now. And so that was like my first actual reporting job. And I really grew to love Southern Humboldt and understand kind of the intricacies of Southern Humboldt communities when I was working down there. And so that's kind of where my background is. And so now, as you said, I write for the Lost Coast Outpost. And, I'd seen, I know it's common knowledge if you pay attention to Board of Supervisors meetings or just what people are talking about, that the economic collapse associated with the cannabis industry is a pretty big deal in Humboldt County, and especially in SoHum, where people are lean much more so on the cannabis industry for employment, survival, what have you. But I had seen, I think I was scrolling around on the Hey What's Going On Garberville Facebook page, or Humboldt Foodies, one of those, and I was really shocked by how many posts I was seeing about Garberville businesses that were closing. And, like Local Flavors was going down, Pineapple Express food truck was relocating, Calico's was leaving and going to Eureka. So, I kind of figured that was my angle, right? Like, this is how I can tell the story of the economic collapse and really try to get the idea across that Garberville is kind of the canary in the coal mine for the entire cannabis industry, the way I was kind of viewing this story. If we see all the struggle happening in Garberville, businesses that are effectively institutions in Garberville, failing, that what's happening out in the hills, so yeah, I guess that's kind of where I was inspired to do the story. And I'll say, as I was writing the story, I kept just like zeroing in and like looking bigger at just, the story can be summed up as easy as the cannabis market has collapsed, people are struggling, people don't have money, that's what happens. Or you can look into the really elaborate history of Southern Humboldt and the cannabis industry that's been super prevalent for, I would say, like the last 50 years, I think would be a fair thing to say. But Yeah, it's just a really, really expansive topic. There are just so many layers to it, whether it's, the cannabis industry itself, its history, how it kind of took over as the main economic driver after the timber industry collapsed. Mental health issues that are down there, how remote it is down there. There's just this, all of Humboldt County is really struggling with a lack of services, mental health services in particular. But Southern Humboldt, forget about it. It's just, it's just so much, so few and far between down there. So long response, but that's kind of what made me want to write this story.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you brought it to everybody's attention. I feel like it's been kind of a long time coming since I don't feel like the cannabis industry collapsed overnight. I feel like a lot of people said as soon as the laws passed, that was when it collapsed. I feel like it was coming a long time before then. That's personal feelings. Though I wanted to switch over to Lauren and ask, because you do work with the houseless, and I wanted to ask if you've seen a larger jump in the houseless population of Garberville at this point, because I feel like that is also a representation of an economic collapse. People who would be working in the hills somehow coming out.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I don't think we have actually seen an increase in the local homeless population in Southern Humboldt. In fact, I think the opposite. A lot of people that were living in the forest surrounding Redway and Garberville had full-time jobs. People made little pallet houses out there, but now those same folks can't find work. So I think we are seeing a decreased homeless population. I will note that our local Redwoods Rural Health Center is doing their own PIT count. So folks in Northern Humboldt might be familiar with that. That's the point in time count where volunteers and DHHS workers go out and try to get a census of the local houseless population. A lot of people in Southern Humboldt don't feel like the numbers here that were conducted a few months back adequately represent what's happening in Southern Humboldt. So we're going to have more numbers there. I do know that through recent programs, Redwoods Rural was able to get full-time housing for 20 Southern Humboldt houseless individuals, and a number, I think maybe about 40 or so more are currently being housed through other programs locally in Southern Humboldt. Laura might want to touch on this later. When people are trying to shift gears and think about the future of Southern Humboldt, tourism is a big thing that comes to mind. But when in the current state of Garberville, come off the 101 and arrive into downtown, you see empty businesses and, people and with their homes on their backs and their dogs, just in the streets. And that's kind of the first impression I think a lot of people get. And one of the long-term conversations is going to be, how to beautify Garberville. And that's something Laura Lasseter, who's also here, has been discussing.
So I wanted to go back to the houseless just for one more second. I do wonder then, is it a reverse of what's happening? There's less houseless because California, even since the Great Depression, since the Dust Bowl, California has been a place for people to go for agricultural work. If there is no work, people won't be here. So do you think that could be a possibility of why there aren't as many houseless hanging out and staying for longer?
Absolutely, 100%. Something that really is scary, though, that I've been reporting on and have just seen within my own friend circle. And when you ask if we're seeing an increase in homeless population, honestly, that could be the future. There are people who are unable to make their land payments. There are people who are unable to make ends meet and are really in a difficult place in their lives trying to figure out how to move forward. And some of these folks, they're in their 60s or older, or 50s. And at this point, a career change, it isn't as easy for somebody maybe 40 or younger, right? So there's definitely people who there's been a increase in mental health crises in Southern Humboldt. We've seen a stark rise of suicides in Southern Humboldt. Can we attribute all of that to the collapsing cannabis economy? No, but I think it is a factor. And we are seeing that play out. And, we're going to be looking into how many different foreclosures and other things are coming about. I'll tell you this, something that's really scary happening today. There are 126 homes in Redway alone, right? This isn't even Southern Humboldt. This is just Redway. Redway has its own water district. Garberville has its own water district. Out of 500 houses, 126, so that's 22%, are getting their services shut off today as we speak due to lack of payment. The district has about $95,000 owed to them, and they're unable to continue running in that deficit. We even asked, are these homes that maybe were converted and are associated with cannabis that people abandoned? And the sad answer was no, these are residents, so that's 126 homes losing water because they cannot pay. So
would that not be considered somehow like an emergency fund?
You would think, Talvi, you would
Yeah,
think,
I would. I really would. I'm like, isn't there like
water, when we look at human rights, some argue water should be a human right, but at this point, even if folks were allotted just 50 gallons a day to their own personal home, the district can't afford that. It is, if you look at a map of this on the state water board's website on what is a low income district, I mean, Redway, Garberville, they're right there, and they are reaching out to the state to look for help. But as we know, right, we just had this disaster with the weather, with the earthquake. There's promised funding for state and federal assistance, but that's years down the line, right? And same with this. Southern Humboldt is in crisis mode. Izzy's article was about a crisis. The SF Gate just did a story about Southern Humboldt. The title was crisis mode, and that is exactly what we're seeing.
It feels like that from just hearing it from you guys and from reading the articles recently. So Lisa Music just joined us. She is a cannabis cultivator and reporter. And so, hi Lisa, how are you doing?
I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yay.
I see you're in the KMUD studios down there.
Yeah.
So awesome. I wanted to ask, because as a cannabis cultivator, which I assume from the brief bio that I was given by you, that means that you are still a cannabis cultivator.
I currently am not. We actually took the year off. We took a break year because it just did not make it financially and did not make sense. And I've actually been in talks with our consultant about whether or not this is feasible. And I will tell you, there's a lot of tears shed, because even aside from economically viable business, it's our culture, and it's tied into the suicides that Lauren is talking about. We're not talking about somebody losing a job that they showed up to and just went to a job. It is in their soul, it's their lifeblood. And there are people that, I mean, for the first time, I couldn't even tell you how long. For the first time ever, we did not grow a single plant, ever. So that's incredibly.
Is that just because of the financial burdens of growing versus the cost, or versus what the prices are on the market for selling? Like, is it just not worth it?
No, it's not worth it. We pretty much sat on our crop the last year that we grew from 2021. And in addition to that, like, it's a lot of money to run a farm all year without a guaranteed income coming in. And so having already put the money out in 2021 without getting any of that money back, it just wasn't feasible. And even when we were able to sell things, when you broke down the amount of hours that my husband worked, he was making minimum wage, but it was something that he loved to do. So, there's that off put, and I really hope that the industry isn't dead, as I am sure a lot of people in Southern Humboldt. But we're not sure. We're not sure where it's going to go.
How do you feel like, because a lot of people stopped years ago, the laws passed for, like, you had to have permits, which were crazy expensive for small time growers to get. And so a lot of people just immediately backed out. How did you manage to keep going? Because I feel like you actually went, if you only stopped growing a year ago, you actually went a lot longer than I know many other people. A lot of people gave it, the old gung ho, and they didn't last that long after those laws were passed.
Right. We actually saw legalization as an opportunity. The first time I got to stand in a field watering a plant and not run when I heard a helicopter was like this celebratory moment for us. And my husband, every time, the mountains of paperwork and so much money invested to do this, he would constantly turn to me and say, like, are you still glad we went legal? Are you still glad? And up until late last year, I always said yes. Watching what has happened, and it's not just the price, but I think that there's a barrier to entry, and more so for other people than even us. And I think that that's really heartbreaking. I know people that loved it. It was their lifeblood, and they've been out from the beginning of legalization or shortly after, due to regulations and the cost being a barrier.
So I wanted to ask Laura or Laura Lasseter, as working with the Business Bureau and the business entities, I am curious what you've seen go on there, because these are a lot of businesses that a lot of people joke that they're fronts or have been fronts, but a lot of them are actual small time businesses that made money off of other people having money in Garberville. And Laura, I hope you don't mind, but we're going to get into that right after a quick break. You're listening to KZZH, and I'm Talvi Free, your host. This is Thursday Night Talk. Welcome back to Thursday Night Talks. This is KZH 96.7 Eureka. Thank you if you are listening to us on YouTube. We do have quite a few guests tonight, so sorry if I'm just not going to give out the phone number for today, though you can always message us at kzh.accesshumboldt.net. I'm here with some wonderful guests. We are discussing, of course, the economic crisis in Southern Humboldt. I have Izzy Vanderheiden, Lauren Schmitt, Lisa Music, and Laura Lasseter. And I wanted to give Laura Lasseter a chance to discuss being from the representative here from the Southern Humboldt Business and Visitors Bureau. I wanted to ask you what trends you have seen with businesses specifically. I'm fully aware that a lot of cannabis entities became chamber members of the business bureaus, but there were a lot in Southern Humboldt that were not. So I'm wondering what you're seeing with the memberships of the Business Bureau right now, and what trends you feel like are actually happening.
Well, I guess I would have to say that the trend that we're seeing is that our businesses are closing. One of the, I guess, the strongest example that I could say was there was a rendering done of Garberville for the Garberville Complete Streets Infrastructure Project, and that was done in 2019. And looking at that project and the renderings, with the small count that we have of businesses, there's 11 businesses that are no longer in existence anymore. And that was from 2019. So we're not talking a long time. So there's, this is a crisis right now. And, it's really difficult. As far as membership, the SHBVB encompasses all the businesses. We are funded by the transient occupancy tax. So we don't have membership based. It's changed over the years, but that's where things are right now. But I know everybody is struggling. And I have a positive, if I could add to kind of what you and Lauren were talking about as far as the mental health crisis that we're having. We had our Let's Talk Tourism on December 2nd, and Sheriff Hansel did commit and partnered with Health and Human Services to have mobile mental health teams part of their outreach programs here. So that's a step in the right direction. And these things that are changing are really part of the overall health and getting us back on track of this community. So I just wanted to add that little positive in there.
It is nice to hear a positive. I also wonder, because if the numbers have dropped since 2019, I mean, is that a representation of the cannabis industry, or is that a representation of the pandemic?
Oh, everything kind of compounded, but Southern Humboldt is so resilient. I would, if you look at it and you say, how can you extract literally tens of millions of dollars from a small community in Southern Humboldt, unincorporated Southern Humboldt, and not invest back in through county or state? We have zero infrastructure improvements, zero. So you do the math, it's kind of like, what did they think was going to happen? We've had $65 million extracted from this community and zero put back in.
Where did the 65 million come from?
That actually is from Measure S, from county and state taxes.
And why was that removed? Or not, like, how did
that was extracted through cultivation? Yes, through cultivation. And that's not that's just that part of it, that portion of it. And I think, Izzy, you touch on that in your article there. So how is this community supposed to survive such an extraction like that? So you just do the math. But, I know, Izzy, you talked about it in your article as well. There's those that are, I guess you could say, old school, that didn't think that they had anything to do with the cannabis industry, but those businesses are struggling as well, and some of them have closed. So it has been the underlying driving force to this economy for decades.
For those businesses, well, I mean, I'm not sure how to phrase this, because I feel like you'd have to be very, like literally pulling the wool over your own eyes to not recognize that a lot of the money that Garberville has had over the last several decades, since the cannabis industry has begun, that it didn't come from the cannabis industry. Like, how is that possible that a business can be there, or any individual be in Garberville or Humboldt County, and not recognize?
Oh, you'd be surprised. You really would be surprised. And I literally, to this day, I'm still hearing that. Well, we're not involved with the cannabis industry. Oh, okay. So, I don't want to name names, but and that's still in Southern Humboldt. There is still that old school mindset, and it's just, I don't understand it, but it still exists. It still exists. There is that separation, and it's part of the culture. It's runs for decades, and it's still here, and that's part of the struggle. And there's so many layers to this, and it's really unfortunate. But there are quite a few positive things in the works, that were discussed at the December 2nd meeting. There's an assessment of assets, tourism assets, so that Southern Humboldt can basically claim their own tourism assets. Lost Coast, King Range, Avenue of the Giants. This is all in Southern Humboldt. So there's also the county is working with a retailer and have funded an assessment to do what it would look like to have a business improvement district in Southern Humboldt, because we're flailing right now. We're unincorporated. We can't apply for grants, loans, any state funding, any federal funding, because we're kind of in this limbo space. So it would give us an option, and it would be sales tax based. So stay tuned, more of that to come. But this could really benefit Southern Humboldt to have this business improvement district.
It sounds like a great idea, just to me. Though, Izzy, you seemed like you had something you wanted to add in there. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. I don't think so. I was just going to offer up if you needed any clarity about how the Measure S tax structure worked or anything to that point.
Yeah.
That was what I muted earlier.
No, I would love to have some clarity on that one.
Let me look in my article here so I can pull up the proper numbers. So for those who aren't familiar, Measure S is the county's cannabis cultivation tax. So let me get the numbers so it really lines out what it is. So it's a 3-tiered cannabis cultivation tax of $1 to $3 per square foot to maintain and improve essential services throughout the county, but the measure itself does not specify how those tax funds should be spent. So the idea is a lot of those funds are supposed to go back to like public safety, and I've attached in my story a document that shows how those funds were spent between fiscal years 2018 and 2021. And like there's almost $550,000 that was spent on one-time road repairs, and so things like that. It could be anywhere, right? So when Laura's talking about no capital improvements in the county, I mean, I don't mean to argue necessarily, but we just don't know, like that money was not earmarked for Soham. And although it doesn't stipulate in the measure, you just kind of feel, I guess, as a person, that you would kind of hope that if again, I think there's a number that's something like 60% of Measure S taxes were taken from the Southern Humboldt community, which we can just kind of say that's like the bottom half of the county, I would kind of guesstimate. But so if 60% of those funds are being taken from these communities, wouldn't it kind of stand to reason that maybe 60% of like putting these improvements that would kind of return to those communities also to kind of offset, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think I wrote that in my story because that seemed a little too potentially contentious, but yeah, I would be curious as to how you feel about that, Laura.
Well, that would be wonderful if that would make sense. But you're right, the way it was written was not that where it was extracted from. It was written that it does not have to come back. It can go, general fund. And, okay, so $500,000 here, $40,000 here. We're talking $60 million extracted. And you can walk around this community and road improvements. Okay, we're all still falling in the same potholes, driving. I mean, there's so much damage, but you can look around this community and say, where did it go? It's not here. And that's the way it was written. So, it's not that they, have done anything against the way it was written. It's just hasn't come back. And part of that is Southern Humboldt really hasn't, over decades, and part of the culture has not stood up and said, hey, this is not okay. we deserve for our infrastructure to be built back up, because quite frankly, we did it ourselves. We needed KMUD, we built that ourselves, the material, and that in a lot of ways is affecting us now. So, we kind of have to own that. It's been part of like, hey, you guys stay up there, we'll stay down here, everybody, kind of behind the curtain type of thing. But that's not okay anymore. So part of what we do is a voice, and bring our county and state representatives together and say, this is not okay. You can't extract millions of dollars from this community and then say we don't understand what happened. So it's a struggle. It is definitely crisis mode right now.
Well, I'm curious if the city Garberville is incorporated within Humboldt County.
Yeah, it's unincorporated. All of Southern Humboldt is unincorporated.
Okay.
And there's the Shelter Cove, which is a resort improvement district. So they have their own district.
Okay. Well, I'm wondering because I know, well, Eureka is incorporated, so it gets quite a bit of county funding. It does have to fight for it. And they have people whose job it literally is to go find federal funding or external funding. Same with Access Humboldt. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of committee. I know very little. I've had a little bit of involvement with the material, which you've brought up, and I am wondering with something like that, where there was a huge drama with the material, and there were many articles years ago about how it was being mismanaged. And so I'm curious if maybe some mismanagement has occurred within just Southern Humboldt in general. I know it's got some very small town vibes and everybody does know everybody. And so I'm wondering if anybody has anything to say on that, because I'm just curious how there's not a committee or a cohesive unit to work on this.
Well, I don't know what there really would be to mismanage. We don't have any government entities here. We're unincorporated. So we don't have a mayor, a city manager, city council. So, there's organizations like the Southern Humboldt Business and Visitor Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce, those are the voices. But, I know Supervisor Bushnell has put in place for a grant writer going forward. But that's part of, you talk about Eureka. Eureka's sales tax base, I think, is 9.25. Southern Humboldt is 7.75%. So every time we're shopping up in Costco, if we're not shopping local, that goes into the improvements and the betterment of Eureka. So part of, having our own business improvement district sales tax base, even if it went up to 8%, we're building that back in. And the way that district would where it has to go back in to Southern Humboldt.
Lauren, I wanted to give you a chance because I know you want to say something.
Yeah, and Laura might know more about this, but there was a point, like when you were asking about being mismanaged, I think the real issue is it's unmanaged. There's really no one at the wheel here. Yeah, we have Supervisor Bushnell, but this is, district level, right? Like, for instance, we have Steve Madrone, but then there's also people that represent for McKinleyville and Blue Lake. And, I think Willow Creek even has, it's not a city council, but they have like a municipal advisory council, a MAC, which Southern Humboldt was trying to do kind of right at the beginning of legalization. That did not fall through. Or pardon me, that did fall through. And I think there are discussions to bring something like that back. Laura, you might know a little more about that. Or we might turn into a business improvement district.
Right. Well, and I think that was the discussion, was what could the MAC actually do for us as far as developing our infrastructure here, where, as far as the funding. Now, if you have the sales tax base for a business improvement district, you're talking maybe enough money, the way the economy is right now, to pay for a grant writer or two to go and source additional funds to bring back to that business improvement district here for Southern Humboldt. It doesn't have enough money to support the infrastructure development, but that, it's crucial right now. There's so many state and federal funds out there that Southern Humboldt isn't really able to apply for. We're at the mercy of the county, but that's part of the history here. It's never been an option before. It's never been, we needed this before, because we funded ourselves. We funded what we needed.
Oh, and Talvi, can I just put something in perspective for folks?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so for those who aren't a part of cannabis, never have been, just quick perspective so people can kind of understand when we're talking about price and population. Okay, when I first moved to Humboldt County about 9-10 years ago, Sheriff Hansel estimated there were 10,000 cannabis farms, mostly in the South County, right? Also eastern portions. Right now, we have 1,000 licensed farms, and the majority of others have either been abated and closed or closed on their own due to price, which is where we'll get to in a second, right? So out of the remaining 1,000 or so licensed farms in Humboldt County, our planning and building director, John Ford, said 300 of those are at risk of losing their permits, being unable to pay. Okay, so this is where price comes in. Again, 9 years ago, when I moved to Humboldt County, you could buy medical cannabis, before legalization under the 215 laws, buy medical cannabis for about, on the upper end of $4,000, on the lower end of $2,000. Today, per pound. Today, that price is, there's a zero off of that. It's anywhere from 400 to 200.
Yeah.
So, and then when we look at the lens of legalization, speaking with the reporter from SF Gate, who, called Garberville the most obvious sign of an economic collapse, crisis mode. We were talking about how legalization, which there's not just one single reason, but with legalization, what he had also seen reporting in years past in Colorado and Washington, and now what he's seeing in California, is when you have a medical market, right, it's exclusively small businesses. That's what Southern Humboldt had for a really long time. There was a point during legalization that Governor Gavin Newsom, I believe he was actually the lieutenant governor at the time, he came here with Congressman Huffman and other members of the state legislature, and they all made this kind of commitment that if the local Southern Humboldt community gets behind cannabis legalization, there will be the amendment that only 1 acre grows can, cultivate for the first 5 years legally to protect those legacy cultivators. That basically got thrown out in the 11th hour, and it really opened the floodgates for these big corporations who right now are able to run in the deficit. These are companies that are worth $100 billion. They're able to, have losses as the market stabilizes. Small mom and pop farms cannot. And that's just to put it a little historical perspective when we're talking about how legalization correlates.
Thank you. So we're going to go take a break real quick. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit to Lisa, somebody who worked heavily in the cultivator field, and then we'll discuss a few other topics about what is going on in Southern Humboldt and why are they suffering an economic crisis right now. This is KZZH. Be right back. Welcome back to Thursday Night Talk on KMUD. I'm here with Isabella Vanderheiden, Lauren Schmitt, Laura Lasseter, and Lisa Music, which we left off with Lauren explaining pretty much the pricing situation for those who are unaware, which surprisingly some people are unaware of the crash in prices per pound and what effect that has with anything, because I know a lot of buyers are excited about that. But those in the community, or especially in the Southern Humboldt community, are very, very much not happy with that. Also, I wonder if it affects quality, and does that mean that those who do have farms have to mass produce and use harsher chemicals and things like that? It almost feels like what created the Dust Bowl. It sounds like to me. Though, Lisa, I wondered if you had any perspective.
Yeah, I think that, especially during the green rush, there was just this movement to grow more and more and more and more. Previously, when the prices were really good, people were, and there's always going to be a bad actor in any industry. And I will say that the majority of the growers that I know, and maybe I, am very select with my friend group, really care about the environment and care about what they're producing. And I think that, it used to be what you could produce to live comfortably, maybe take a vacation. We're not talking Bali for a month. There were those people. There are those people. But there are, for the majority of it, they were families growing to own a home and to donate to the PTA. And I think that that is one of the things that you guys were touching on, is that a lot of people didn't realize the impacts of cannabis, not just in Southern Humboldt, completely all the way to North County, all over, and the economic devastation that's happening. And tons of people that were anti-cannabis were celebrating this demise. And it's been a little bit hard to watch and listen to. But at the same time, I think it's a furniture store in Arcata was telling us, just like I think in 2018, when there was that dip, that their sales had plummeted because they had a lot of Southern Humboldt customers. They had a lot of grower customers. And it's affecting everywhere. It's affecting restaurants and hotels and people being able to, take vacations or, just shop. And it's widespread. And I don't celebrate that one bit, but we are kind of all in this boat together. You can't have any industry completely, collapse without it affecting the surrounding businesses, because the cannabis industry, a lot of people were just like, oh, these rich growers. And really, those growers employed workers, and they employed trimmers, and they spent their money, and their workers spent their money, and they donated. At our local homecoming last year, I think we got like maybe $50 out of our tip jar, and that tip jar is usually $5,000. And that's the difference between a healthy cannabis economy in Southern Humboldt versus what we're going through right now.
It does sound like it was a cannabis bubble, or as one of my producer is talking about an artificial economy in a sort of way, which I'm not exactly sure what he means by that. We can ask him after the show. But I wanted to ask Izzy, because of all the research that you did to create the article, because I don't feel like it was one thing that caused this. Yes, it was the cannabis industry, but did you find that there were other factors involved?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge COVID or the inflation that's occurring right now. So those are all things, but I would totally echo what other folks here have said, that it was, what you said, that this was before legalization. It was, I mean, I think I came on to KMUD and really started to learn about the cannabis industry in 2015. So really right before legalization happened. So I was kind of learning as it was happening. And, at that point, people kind of saw the writing on the wall, like everywhere is starting to legalize, at the state level. So it's probably going to happen here. So it was at that point that county officials were going out to, holding meetings out in Bryceland, at the Harris General Store, at Bald Point Road. And this is like the planning department, the sheriff, water board, fish and wildlife, second district supervisor, South Fennel at the time. And they're going out there to talk to people and to just kind of talk to them about what some of the concerns are that they have, and how they kind of want to see the county's cannabis land use ordinance built. And what really struck me throughout all these conversations was people just, and continues to strike me, is so many of these cultivators were like, this is not going to work. The way you are structuring this, the way the state is structuring this, it's not going to favor the small growers. We're going to get wiped out. And in my mind at the time, I was kind of like, well, I don't know if that's true. And it just seems like there's, the only people I knew were the small growers. So in my mind, it was like, well, I know that there's tons of other people I obviously don't know, but there are so many of you, and like, as long as you abide by these rules, you'll be okay, right? But of course, when it comes to it, and I don't think anyone really realized how big of a burden it would be, is, all the permitting fees. I mean, Lisa surely knows much more about this than I do, but, all these hoops and hoops that you have to jump through to try to meet this criteria. And, I have friends in the cultivating community that have told me, I had to get this new culvert that was, 2 inches bigger in diameter than the one that I already had, that I had put in like 2 years before, because of some, threatened species of salamander that they couldn't even actually find on my property. Things like that. That's like, cool, $5,000 to do that, and so you're doing that while simultaneously, the price per pound of cannabis is going down, because it's, whether it's there's more people because people are still coming in. I mean, that's still kind of at the, I don't know if you would say that's really the tail end of the green rush at that point, but there's also other markets elsewhere in nearby states. But at any rate, the price per pound of cannabis is going down, so people aren't getting as much money for their product, and then they're having to shell out all this money. And yeah, I think I answered your question, but it's just, it's just all these things piling on, and then of course there's external factors that are occurring as well, and COVID and all kinds of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also, Amazon versus going to the small shop. There's everybody over the pandemic buying online in order to avoid other people, or even using services such as, you use DoorDash, you are then regulated to what is on DoorDash. For those who couldn't afford the technological upgrades, be it whatever reason, then they can't meet up with the demand. There's a lot that I feel like can go into this, though I feel very convinced that yes, the cannabis industry is definitely 100% ingrained in Southern Humboldt culture, which I would love if somebody stepped up and just did a whole anthropological perspective study on what Southern Humboldt culture is, because I think a lot of people out there don't really realize what it actually is. It's a lot of, it's a vibe. It is definitely a vibe. And I will say that, a vibe I really love, because people are wonderful down there. But I want to switch over for just a little bit before we get into our round robins. I just kind of wanted to ask a softball of kind of question of what next? What will help improve the situation in Southern Humboldt? What can be done? Just random ideas that anybody has. Because I feel like this is a time when ideas are really, really needed. Think tanks are needed. People need to come together and figure it out.
Sorry. I was just going to jump in to just pass it off to Laura, actually, because Laura is, I mean, I'm sure you had a whole team of people that, went into the Let's Talk Tourism meeting, but, that meeting, getting all these people, community members, stakeholders, people from the county government that don't visit Southern Humboldt, they all were in the Mateel talking about these issues. And I feel like that is one of the most critical things that folks can do in trying to move anything forward. But yeah, I would hand off to Laura at that point.
Okay, let's start with Lisa and then we'll go to Laura. So Lisa?
I was just going to say that as well, that I think organization, well, I mean, Laura's great, the SHBVB, we have really amazing organizations around here, but we kind of have like a dozen of them instead of collaborating together. And I think that finding a voice, because speaking with Scott Adair, he was kind of saying the same thing. Like, one of our issues is that we were so self-sufficient. We were putting $5,000 in the tip jar, and we were funding our own school teachers and our own improvements in our businesses. And we were not being the squeaky wheel. And at this point, all this money from this community, and we're just talking cannabis Measure S money. We're not even talking sales tax. We're not talking about all of the people that shop in North County, groceries, whatever. It's an extraction-based economy, and we have to walk away from that. And having a voice like the SHBVB and the people that are sounding the alarm, and thank you, Izzy, for that article. It's really important for people to say, it's time to start giving back when we have did nothing but take.
So we are going to start our round robin. Laura, I'm going to start with you in case, so that way you have just a little bit more time. We have about 90 seconds to 2 minutes apiece. And if you want to continue to discuss what the future is, that's great, but just what you want people listening to take out of this conversation. So Laura, let's start with you.
Okay, well, thank you. I think when people hear the word tourism, there's one-track mind, but we have to take into account that, tourism encompasses everything on the economic development side. You're talking about the beautification of the community, the health, the safety, it all ties together. And, that's why we did our Let's Talk Tourism. In December, we brought together, our panelists, 8 panelists. We had over 20 audience representatives from all aspects of the community, from the credit union, from Southern Health. We had farmers, you name it. I think we tried to cover it because it really affects all of us. And so we're going to continue these conversations. We've decided to have some spotlight editions for Let's Talk Tourism, and those are going to be in March. And then we're going to have another Let's Talk Tourism on May 19th. And we're going to be keeping the same platform. I think a lot of people, we had, I'd say, probably over 250 attendees. And now the community knows what to expect, from the conversation here, asking questions, having all of the county representatives under one roof. So there's no, oh, let me talk to so-and-so and get back to you. Well, that so-and-so is sitting right next to you. So let's have this conversation now. So it really affects all aspects of the community, from our small Garberville Airport. We're working with Cody from Aviation, getting new hangars replaced, finally a restroom. It's been decades, like we said, with the sheriff and Health and Human Services, the tourism assessments, the business improvement district assessment. So there's some real positives. And then, the Streets Project, you can go to change.org. There is a petition there for the Garberville Complete Streets Infrastructure Project, and that has passed through the state level and is at the federal level for funding. So these are things that the SHBVB have been working on for years with some of our partners and stakeholders. And so, yes, it's crisis, but there's some things happening. So that just trying to highlight the positives there.
I appreciate that, Laura. Lisa, any final thoughts? You got about 90 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, from a cannabis front, I think that our government entities need to actually step up in meaningful ways. I think that at this point it's lip service in the sense that they're like, hey, we can get your tax money, but they're taking our money, turning around and giving it back in certain areas of grants. However, a lot of that's eaten up by government entities in administration costs and not going back into the communities that are truly suffering. There are people in this county, in Mendocino County and Trinity County, making $100,000 worth of, salaries that are not helping farmers. And, without the farmers, that's going to end. And I think that, legal, traditional market, whatever you want to call it, the war on drugs continues. And that we see that whether it's armed CDFW guys showing up to do a paperwork check, or whether or not they continue to abate our county into oblivion. And it's a plant. So I think that until that mentality of punitive enforcement changes, the cannabis economy is just going to continue to spiral out of control locally.
That could be a topic all on its own. Thank you so much. Lauren.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick. I agree with everything that we discussed tonight. Let's do it again because we could go for a whole nother hour. I will say, it's not all doom and gloom. Our region, as Izzy has pointed out, was a boom and bust economy, has been since white settlers came here. As well as our culture with cannabis, Southern Humboldt also has a culture of resilience and sustainability. And I think that's going to be the saving grace here. We do have new businesses. New businesses have moved into Garberville. It's been amazing to interview them. They're breathing hope into this community. And also, when we talk about tourism, people really want to spearhead ecotourism. And we're really dialing in what that looks like. Also, getting educations in green energy, because solar and wind energy are right here, and that's going to be a sustainable pathway for many people to move forward. So here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Izzy.
Really just, I guess, echo what other folks have said here, what Lisa had said, the need for meaningful change and for, not just lip service and not just saying like, oh, we're going to do all these things, because there were some moments during that tourism meeting that I did kind of feel that, but I didn't want to feel that, but Garberville is really a community worth saving. All of Soham, those are people, that want to take care of their families and, are just trying to do something that they really love. I know, or I have an idea of what growing cannabis and the culture means to some of the folks living out there. And I think I really hope the county and our state and local lawmakers, officials, really take action to create meaningful change and hear people out.
Well, thank you so much. I'd like to again thank everyone on our panel. We have Izzy Vanderheiden from Lost Coast Outpost, staff reporter there, former KMUD co-news director, I believe. We've got Lauren Schmitt, the current KMUD news director, Laura Lasseter, from the Southern Humboldt Business and Visitors Bureau, and Lisa Music from the who is a cannabis cultivator and a reporter. I want to thank you all so much for being here. That's about all the time we have today. As always, I feel like this specific show brought up a lot more questions for me. So hopefully you will all, you're all invited to future shows, and I hope to see you again. That's about all the time we have today. Of course, it always feels like we can go forever. If you have topics or suggestions for this program, please email us at kzzh@accesshumboldt.net. I'm your host, Talvi Freed. You can find me on Facebook and send me messages there. I don't care if you curse in the messages, just never on air. And this show does replay Friday evenings at 8 p.m. right here on KZZH 96.7. You can also watch us on Access Humboldt's YouTube channel. As well, you can catch us on Access Humboldt's actual TV stations, so you can all see our shining bright faces. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next week with a whole new topic and a whole new crew of local panelists.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.